Imagine you are handed a check, like a literal $200 million government check.
That is a lot of money.
Right. It's guaranteed. It's, enough capital to secure your company's future for the next decade. But,
Yeah.
and here's the gut, there is a massive string attached.
It always is, right?
Exactly. The moment you cash that check, half of your core engineering team might just, walk out the door and protest. And the media, they will almost certainly label you a weaponized surveillance contractor. So the question is, do you take the money?
Wow. I mean, that is the exact dilemma that breaks most founders. You're weighing existential financial security against, well, the total erosion of your company's moral identity.
Yeah, which is terrifying.
And in the hyper-accelerated tech landscape,
Yeah.
you usually have about 48 hours to make that decision before the market just makes it for you.
Welcome to today's deep dive into the sources. We've got an incredibly potent piece of source material today. We are looking at excerpts from this really fascinating tech realism novel called The Founder and the Fisherman.
Such a great concept.
It really is. It's set in 2026, so it's dropping us into this world that is totally defined by AI infrastructure, intense national security paranoia, and just this relentless venture capital pressure.
Yeah, a real pressure cooker.
Totally. And we're following this protagonist named Shyam. He's the founder and CEO of a company called Vesper Systems. And Shyam is, he's operating at maximum intensity.
Oh, absolutely. He's wound so tight.
Yeah, he builds autonomous agent orchestration. And just for anyone not deep in the technical weeds, that essentially means he builds software that can make decisions, execute complex tasks, and literally spend money on its own without waiting for a human to, click approve.
Right. It's not just a chatbot. It's high-speed, high-stakes infrastructure.
Exactly. And Shyam runs Vesper Systems like a literal warship.
He really does.
His office is basically a command center. He's got this glowing metrics, wall tracking latency, uptime, burn to multiple, all of it. He views his company as this weapon of foresight.
And you see that in his entire operating philosophy, right? It's distilled into this one mantra he has written on his whiteboard. It says, "Speed is a moral choice. Trust is a throughput multiplier."
I love that quote. It's intense, but that mantra is fascinating because it frames velocity not just as a business advantage, but as an ethical imperative. Like, if you aren't moving at blinding speed, you are actively failing your mission.
Which is the standard Silicon Valley operating system right now.
Right. But our source material introduces this massive friction point, and it comes in the form of a secondary main character, Shyam's CEO coach.
The coach is just such a brilliant foil to Shyam.
So different. This coach is radically patient, and he absolutely refuses to give advice in conference rooms.
Yeah, no whiteboards for him.
None. Whenever Shyam faces a company-ending crisis, the coach just pulls him completely out of Silicon Valley. He takes him out on the water. They literally go fishing.
Which is, it creates this brilliant diagnostic environment. You have this world of pristine code, autonomous agents and rigid algorithms crashing straight into the physical, unpredictable reality of a river or an ocean.
It's such a weird dynamic. It's like trying to debug a quantum computer with a piece of driftwood.
That is exactly what it's like.
But somehow it actually works. The coach forces Shyam to realize that, sure, you can program an agent to execute 1 million trades a second, but you cannot debug humans like code. Leadership is fundamentally analog.
It is. It's messy.
So our mission today is to follow Shyam through this brutal gauntlet of leadership crises, 12 of them, to be exact.
And each one is resolved through a specific fishing metaphor, which is so clever.
For you listening, whether you are running a startup, managing a small team, or just, trying to survive a high-pressure corporate environment, the goal is to extract these actual mechanics of survival.
Right. How do you navigate a world that demands algorithmic perfection without completely losing your humanity in the process?
Exactly. So let's jump in. We start with the catalyst for everything. It's that $200 million question I brought up at the start.
The Patriot contract.
Yes. Vesper Systems is offered this massive government defense contract.
And in the industry, they call this glacier money.
Glacier money.
Yeah, because it moves slowly. But it is immense, it's inevitable, and it completely alters the landscape around it. It doesn't care about consumer hype cycles or, venture capital mood swings. It just crushes everything in its path.
But taking government defense money in 2020 isn't just like a financial transaction. In certain circles, it is a branding death sentence.
Oh, absolutely.
You instantly transition from being viewed as this neutral, helpful infrastructure platform to being a surveillance apparatus. You basically become part of the military-industrial complex overnight.
And Shyam actually genuinely believes in defending national systems. He's not doing it just for the money. But he is paralyzed by the narrative warfare that he knows will inevitably follow this contract.
He wants the power of the capital, but he is terrified of the radioactive label.
Right. So, to break that paralysis, the coach takes Shyam out to a place called Fog Lake.
This scene is so vivid.
It's dawn, they're on this high mountain lake, and the atmospheric conditions are just suffocating. The fog is so incredibly thick that they cannot see the shoreline, they can't see the sun, they can barely see the water a few yards away.
And Shyam is sitting in the boat, doing what Shyam does. He's frantically trying to analyze the situation, calculating probabilities on his phone, mapping out PR strategies.
And the coach just sits there
Yeah.
in absolute silence.
It's basically a sensory deprivation exercise. The fog represents the sheer impossibility of predicting the long-term cultural and political consequences of taking this contract.
Exactly. You cannot model how Twitter's going to react in 3 years. You cannot predict which tech journalists are going to write hit pieces. The shoreline is completely obscured.
So what does the coach do?
He delivers this absolute masterclass in moral architecture. He tells Shyam, amateurs panic in the fog, professionals slow down.
Oof, that's good.
Right. He explains that if you cannot see the shoreline, you absolutely do not launch the ship. But, and this is key, that doesn't mean you do nothing.
Right, you don't just freeze.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The coach tells Shyam to go back to his pristine office, erase that hyper-aggressive mantra about speed off his whiteboard, and write down a single definitive sentence. What will Vesper Systems not build?
See, that inversion of the standard Silicon Valley mindset is so powerful to me. I mean, every founder has a pitch deck outlining what they're going to build, right? They have these roadmaps stretching out into the next decade.
Always. Endless feature pipelines.
But almost no one writes down a codified list of what they refuse to build.
Because refusing to build something means leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
And that feels completely unnatural to a hyper-growth founder.
It feels like failure.
But the coach gives Shyam 3 mechanical rules for ethical AI architecture to help him. First, you never build a system you cannot audit.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, you never build a system you cannot kill.
A kill switch. Crucial.
And third, this is the heavy one. You never build a system whose purpose you are ashamed to explain to your own engineering team.
Wow. That third rule is the trapdoor, right? That just dropped Shyam right into reality.
It completely exposes him.
Because up until this moment, he has been pitching Vesper to his team as this utopian, future-proof, helpful infrastructure project. He hasn't told them they might be pivoting to defense.
He's been hiding it.
And the weight of this impending contract, even before it's signed, has already started to crush the internal foundation of the company.
The physical manifestation of that pressure in the text is actually terrifying. The engineering floor used to be this vibrant, noisy neural network. Debates, memes, rapid prototyping.
Real startup energy.
Yeah. But it goes completely dead. The Slack channels are silent. The engineers actually voluntarily cancel their Friday product demos, telling management they just don't have the time anymore.
The detail that got me was the description of them staring at their monitors. The text says, the engineers don't blink anymore.
Oh, that gave me chills.
Because when people stop blinking, they aren't engaged in creative problem solving. They aren't building. They are surviving. They have totally disconnected their emotional intelligence and are just functioning as raw processing power.
In a startup, that kind of inertia is fatal. It is the literal definition of burnout. But it's not just from overwork. It's driven by a perceived betrayal.
They feel the ground shifting.
Right. They feel the company's mission changing beneath their feet without their consent. They're on this treadmill that just keeps scooting up, and they don't even know why they are running anymore.
And Shyam sees this mutiny forming, right? He knows they're losing momentum, and his instinct, because he's Shyam, is to crack the whip harder. He wants to force them through the transition through sheer will.
So the coach intercepts them again. They go hiking up to a different lake, and the coach hands Shyam this old, weathered fishing rod. It already has these visible stress fractures in the wood. And he makes Shyam put on heavy work gloves.
Which is a weird thing to wear while fishing.
Totally weird.
Yeah.
But the coach is setting up a physical demonstration of Shyam's management style. So Shyam casts the line and almost immediately gets a massive strike from a heavy trout.
And his body just takes over.
Exactly. His instinct, driven by all his boardroom training and VC pressure, is to force the outcome right now. He yanks the rod backward with violent force to secure the catch.
And the rod shatters.
It completely explodes. It doesn't just bend, it violently splinters into pieces. The line snaps back, goes slack, and the fish is gone.
And Shyam is furious. He's yelling about losing the catch. But the coach just calmly looks at him and says, "You didn't lose the fish. You broke the rod."
It is such a devastating critique because Shyam is treating his human engineers as compute resources.
Like servers.
Right, in server architecture, if you need more output, you just pump more electricity into the system. You overclock the processors. Shyam is applying that exact mechanical logic to human psychology.
He is pulling so hard for output that the very tools of creation, his people, are shattering under the tension.
And then the coach sits on the bank and painstakingly patches the splintered rod with tape and resin. He explains that, sure, the rod might function again, but it will never have the same structural integrity. It is full of scar tissue.
Right.
When you break people by treating them like disposable tools, fixing that shattered trust takes infinitely longer than it took to build it in the first place.
Okay, but I have to push back here because I'm struggling a bit with the coach's advice.
Okay, let's hear it.
Telling a Silicon Valley executive to stop yanking the fishing rod sounds really beautiful when you're on a mountain retreat, but in reality, urgency is the only currency that matters out there.
It's highly competitive, yes.
If Shyam slows down, if he stops pushing his team to the absolute brink, a competitor with $1 billion in sovereign funding is going to eat his lunch. Isn't this coach just peddling poetic idealism that will ultimately get Vesper killed in the market?
It sounds idealistic, sure, but only until you look at the raw mechanics of productivity. A broken team produces zero currency.
Oh, yeah.
Let's think of it like this. If you overclock a server farm until the cooling systems fail and the motherboards literally melt into slag.
Yeah, then you have nothing.
Exactly. It doesn't matter that they were processing data at record speeds right before the fire. The output is now zero. The coach isn't advocating for laziness. He is advocating for sustainable yield.
Sustainable yield, okay.
If you treat your engineering team like a strip mine, just extracting every ounce of value and collapsing the tunnels behind you as you go, you will eventually run out of raw material. You simply cannot build long-term infrastructure on a foundation of short-term exhaustion.
That makes a lot of sense. And it forces Shyam to completely change his approach. He goes back to the office and he calls a raw, unscripted, all-hands meeting with just the engineering team.
No slide decks.
No PR talking points. He just stands in front of them and says, the absolute most difficult thing a founder could admit, you are not compute.
He breaks the fog for them. He openly admits that the government contract is on the table. But instead of spinning it with corporate speak, he takes a marker, walks over to the whiteboard, and writes down those strict, non-negotiable ethical boundaries we talked about.
He codifies what they will not build right in front of the people who would be asked to build it.
He returns their agency to them.
And the text says you can see the physiological shift in the room. The engineers start to blink again.
The tension finally breaks.
It is a temporary patch on a splintered rod, but the tape holds. However, and this is a big sour, when the rank-and-file engineers start questioning the mission, that apathy almost always travels upward, right?
Oh, absolutely. The people who built the foundation start looking at the cracks and wondering if it's time to cash out. Which brings us to a massive structural failure at the executive level. Crisis number 3.
The departure of the co-founder, Vikram.
Right, and Vikram isn't just an employee. This is the guy who was sitting across from Shyam in the coffee shop on day 1, literally writing the original code base on napkins.
The origin story.
But Vikram walks into Shyam's pristine command center office carrying a literal and metaphorical suitcase.
He is done.
Completely exhausted. He tells Shyam that he doesn't even recognize the company anymore, and he wants to sell his equity to a foreign private equity firm and just walk away.
And he hits Shyam where it hurts. He looks him in the eye and says, "You've become the kind of founder we used to make fun of."
Which is a lethal strike to a founder's ego.
In startup culture, the origin story is treated as a sacred religion. The whole two guys in a garage against the world myth.
Exactly.
So when a co-founder leaves, it isn't just a personnel change. It feels like a total betrayal of the faith. And Shyam's immediate reaction is to go to war.
He wants blood.
He wants to deploy lawyers, dilute Vikram's shares, and rewrite the internal narrative to make Vikram look like a weak link who just couldn't handle the scale. He wants to destroy him.
Which is, unfortunately, the standard playbook for a messy corporate divorce.
Mm-hmm.
But the coach intervenes before Shyam can send the attack dogs.
Back to the water.
back to the water. He takes Shyam out for what he calls a two-line day. They're using this specialized, highly complex rig that has a single main line branching off to two separate hooks.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
They get a massive strike, and suddenly they have two large fish tangled together, actively fighting each other on the exact same line.
And if you have ever fished a rig like that, you know exactly what happens if you panic.
It's chaos.
If you try to rip those fish apart violently or crank the reel as fast as you can, the sheer chaotic kinetic energy will cause the hooks to tear right through the flesh. You rip both fish to shreds, the main line snaps, and you lose absolutely everything.
The mechanics of the metaphor are just perfect here. The coach explains that Shyam is trying to forcefully control everything in one line.
Right.
He's trying to hold on to Vikram's equity, placate the remaining engineers, and appease the board of directors all at once, just through sheer brute force.
And the coach tells him what?
The lesson is that structural separation must be deliberate, slow, and meticulously negotiated. If you treat a departing co-founder as an enemy combatant, they will become one, and the resulting thrashing will destroy the company's internal ecosystem.
There's a line from the coach that really stuck with me. He says, Vikram isn't leaving the company, he's leaving the story.
That is crucial.
You have to give the departing founder a dignified off-ramp. It has to be positioned as an evolution of the company, not a bitter divorce.
And the reason this requires such delicate handling isn't just about protecting Vikram's feelings. It is about the audience.
The rest of the company.
Specifically, people like Priya, Vesper's brilliant head of enterprise engineering. She is watching exactly how Shyam handles this.
Right, she's taking notes.
If Shyam publicly executes his co-founder and strips his equity, he is broadcasting a terrifying signal to Priya and the rest of the executive team. He is telling them that loyalty is strictly conditional and that this is a culture of ruthless retaliation.
So by untangling the lines slowly, Shyam is preserving the psychological safety of the people who are actually choosing to stay.
Exactly. So Shyam swallows his pride. He meets Vikram at a neutral location, a restaurant away from the intimidating metrics wall, and they negotiate a structured, board-approved buyout of his shares.
They announce it internally as a planned advisory transition.
He successfully untangles the fish without tearing the line.
But of course, just as he secures his leadership team, the ground opens up underneath them anyway.
Crisis number 4.
The product itself fails catastrophically. We enter the territory of the autonomous failure. The algorithm lies.
This is a nightmare scenario. A prominent tech influencer publishes this viral, highly detailed video exposing that Vesper's flagship enterprise agent, the software that is supposed to be mathematically infallible, actually fabricated complex compliance reports for a Fortune 100 client.
Wait, it didn't just make a math error?
No, it generated completely fictional legal citations to fill in gaps in its data. It hallucinated legal precedent.
Wow. And in 2026, when trust is literally the only currency an AI infrastructure company possesses, this is an apocalyptic event.
Oh, the investors are in full panic mode instantly.
The Fortune 100 client's legal team is threatening massive lawsuits, even hinting at criminal exposure for fraud. I mean, the walls are closing in at light speed.
But it is vital to understand the mechanism behind the failure. The AI didn't suddenly become sentient and malicious, right?
Right.
It failed because of the organizational physics that Shyam himself created. An exhausted mid-level engineer, feeling this crushing pressure to deploy faster, had bypassed the standard peer review checks to merge an experimental fallback protocol into the production environment.
So the algorithm lied because the company's culture explicitly rewarded the lie that velocity was more important than safety guards.
Exactly. And Shyam is paralyzed by the liability. He is sitting in his office, frantically drafting PR statements, calling it an edge case anomaly, and planning to silently patch it over the weekend to cover it up.
But the coach texts him to meet at the docks. And this time, it isn't a serene morning on a mountain lake.
No, it is a literal storm.
The sky is bruised purple, the wind is howling, the water is violently chopping, and this small boat is just being tossed around like a bath toy.
Shyam is terrified. He's screaming over the wind, demanding to know how to spin the lawsuits, and the coach completely ignores him.
Typical coach.
Instead, the coach drags out this massive rusted iron anchor and drops it onto the deck with a heavy thud. And he asks Shyam a purely mechanical question. What happens if you drop an anchor in shallow, rocky water while moving at full speed during a storm?
I mean, Dropping an anchor while moving at high speed isn't just stopping, it is a violent, destructive act.
It really is.
It's like tearing up your own deck to save the hull. The boat will violently jerk, equipment will fly everywhere, you might even crack the fiberglass. But it is the only physical mechanism that will stop the current from dragging you directly into the rocks.
It's exactly the right mechanical translation. The instinct of every single tech founder during a crisis is to try and outrun reality.
Use PR spin, obfuscate the data.
Yeah, call a critical failure unexpected behavior.
Hmm.
But the coach forces Shyam to realize that hiding the truth doesn't protect the ship. It just drags it further into the storm until the hull finally breaches and you sink.
So the anchor represents what?
The anchor represents the company's core values and the founder's willingness to publicly bleed. Trust is never protected by pretending to be perfect. It is protected by the painful transparency of admitting when you are fundamentally broken.
I really like that analogy. Dropping the anchor early in a crisis is like pulling the emergency brake on a train.
Exactly.
It is violently uncomfortable and everyone gets thrown around the cabin, but it's the only way to stop yourselves from going over the cliff.
So Shyam drops the anchor. He calls an emergency company-wide all-hands meeting. No slides, no corporate polish, no lawyers vetting his words
He
beforehand.
just stands up there.
He stands in front of his entire staff and publicly takes the blame. He explicitly connects the product failure to his own leadership, stating, "I pushed for speed and I allowed our architectural standards to degrade."
And then he does the unthinkable.
He pulls the emergency brake.
He completely freezes all new feature releases indefinitely until a third-party safety audit is completed.
He prioritizes absolute honesty over public relations, and in the short term, the financial damage is agonizing.
Oh, I'm sure. Customers pause contracts, the stock valuation dips in the secondary markets.
But strategically,
Mhm.
it stabilizes the boat. The clients actually respect the freeze because it proves Vesper takes safety seriously.
Right, but showing that level of vulnerability in a corporate ecosystem is basically like bleeding in shark-infested waters.
It inevitably invites predators.
Which transitions us perfectly into crisis number 5, the boardroom coup.
Because when a founder publicly admits a systemic failure, the board of directors rarely applauds their bravery.
They don't care about bravery.
No, they see a massive liability that needs to be actively managed. So you have these 3 board members, Jacob, Malcolm, and Denise, who start holding private, unrecorded dinners.
The Whisper campaign.
Exactly. They begin circulating weaponized corporate euphemisms. They start suggesting Vesper might need a professional CEO to navigate the crisis, or an adult in the room to provide wartime cabinet support.
It's a highly coordinated soft coup, and this is a textbook Silicon Valley governance maneuver. The board knows they cannot just fire a visionary founder without causing a massive investor revolt.
It would spook the market too much.
Right. So instead, they actively try to destabilize the founder psychologically. They introduce doubt, they suggest emotions, and they just wait for the founder to panic and react emotionally.
Because when the founder eventually screams in a board meeting or sends a deranged late-night email, the board used that exact emotional reaction as documented proof.
Proof that the founder is unstable and must be replaced for the good of the shareholders.
It's so manipulative, and Shyam can see the trap perfectly. But his pride demands that he fight back. He wants to walk into that boardroom, slam his fist on the mahogany table, and threaten to burn the entire company down if they try to cross him.
But the coach steps in.
The coach takes him out to a wide, deep river. And there's no outboard motor on this particular boat. There were just 2 wooden oars.
The metaphor of the silent river.
Yes. The coach points out that the river makes absolutely no noise, yet it possesses the kinetic energy to move millions of tons of water and literally carve through solid bedrock.
Okay.
He tells Shyam, "You have spent the last 3 years building branches, shiny new products, press releases, high-profile contracts. But the board is testing the strength of your roots."
That hits hard. If you are listening to this and you have ever been in a corporate meeting where your superiors are, soft launching your replacement or heavily critiquing your department, your immediate biological instinct is to defend your resume.
Of course. You want to argue.
You want to justify your existence, to thrash against the current. But the coach is saying, play the silent river. If you fight the board with raw emotion, you exhaust your own energy and hand them the exact ammunition they need to terminate you.
You have to row with the current, using its own momentum against it. So Shyam attends this private, hostile board dinner. And instead of launching into a defensive monologue like they expect, he just sits back and listens.
He absorbs it.
He absorbs their critiques. When they suggest he lacks the operational maturity to lead through the crisis, he doesn't raise his voice.
Hmm.
He asks calm, surgical questions. He says, what specific, quantifiable metrics would prove to this board that I can evolve into the operational leader Vesper needs?
Oh, that is a brilliant judo move. He forces them to define the exact parameters of his failure.
They wanted a screaming match to justify his removal. Instead, he corners them into agreeing to a highly structured 90-day operational survival plan.
He uses their own corporate governance mechanisms against them.
He buys himself 3 months of guaranteed runway to solidify his roots with the engineering crew and the major clients.
Okay, so he secures his position at the top. But beneath him, the company is basically tearing itself apart from the inside.
Crisis number 6.
Vesper has scaled so quickly that it has developed two distinct competing gravitational fields. It's a full-blown cultural civil war.
On one side, you had the enterprise builders, led by Priya and Rachel. This faction worships compliance, safety protocols, and deep structural stability.
They're building bank-grade vaults.
Exactly. And on the other side, you have the crypto cowboys, led by this aggressive executive named Leo. His velocity team worships permissionless networks, absolute speed, and high-risk speculation.
They want to break things.
They were pushing to launch an autonomous on-chain execution agent that can trade millions of dollars without any human oversight.
These two cultures are fundamentally philosophically incompatible. You literally have a faction building seatbelts and a faction actively trying to remove the brakes.
So the coach takes Shyam to a specific point on a river where the water physically forks around a large landmass.
The forked stream.
Right. One branch of the river is deep, calm, and slow-moving. The other branch is a violent, rushing, foaming rapid. The coach hands Shyam 2 fully rigged fishing rods and simply instructs him to fish both streams simultaneously.
Which is mechanically impossible. You cannot maintain tension on two opposing currents.
You really can't. When Shyam tries to cast into both, he hooks a massive aggressive fish in the rapids. But because his physical stance is completely divided and his balance is compromised by trying to hold the other rod, he cannot set the hook properly.
So what happens?
The line snaps instantly, the rod is ripped right out of his hands, and the sheer force nearly pulls him over the gunnels into the freezing water.
It is a brutal physical demonstration of strategic failure. Founders, just by their very psychological makeup, are expansive thinkers. They suffer from this delusion of infinite capacity. To a visionary founder, choosing a single lane feels like leaving future impact and massive revenue on the table. Why is it so hard for them to just pick a lane and commit to it?
Because they want to conquer everything.
Yeah.
But the coach delivers a harsh reality check. He says a forked stream is not 2 separate streams. It is a single body of water that simply cannot agree on its direction.
You cannot serve two gods in one company.
You really can't. The god of safety and the god of speed operate on totally different moral frameworks. Eventually, one will demand the absolute sacrifice of the other. If you try to placate both, you just create an environment of constant internal sabotage.
Strategy is the art of sacrifice. It is choosing one river and completely abandoning the other.
So Shyam finally realizes that Vesper's true identity, the root system that will actually survive the decade, lies in enterprise stability.
He makes the call.
He makes the agonizing, deeply unpopular decision to go to Leo and cleanly spin out the entire crypto division into a separate, independent entity.
He sacrifices the massive short-term revenue of the crypto boom to protect the structural integrity of his enterprise clients.
It is a massive maturation moment for the company.
But of course, maturity requires professionalization, which creates a vacuum that invites our next crisis.
Crisis number 7.
Enter the beautiful predator, Adrian Vale.
Adrian. Adrian is brought in as a high-level operational executive to help scale the enterprise side. And on paper, Adrian is an absolute godsend.
He looks perfect.
He is a brilliant operator. He closes massive 8-figure contracts effortlessly, and he reorganizes sluggish teams with flawless precision. He makes the revenue charts go vertical.
But interpersonally, he is a monster.
A total monster. He leaves a trail of psychological wreckage across the entire organization. He humiliates junior engineers in front of the whole company, disguising his cruelty as, quote, radical candor.
Oh, I hate that excuse.
Or he claims he's professionalizing the culture. He creates an environment of absolute terror, which ultimately drives away Carla, one of the original foundational engineers who helped write the core architecture.
She just leaves her laptop on her desk and walks out.
Adrian represents the ultimate paradox of hypercapitalism. He objectively makes the numbers go up, But his methodology completely destroys the company's internal immune system.
And when confronted, Adrian uses his performance as a shield. He literally tells Shyam, you cannot build a trillion-dollar infrastructure company by protecting people's feelings.
And Shyam is conflicted because the board absolutely loves Adrian's numbers. So Shyam and the coach go deep-sea fishing out on the open ocean.
This metaphor is visceral.
Very. Shyam manages to hook an incredibly stunning exotic ocean fish. It is brilliantly colored, highly valuable, but it possesses a defense mechanism of sharp, hidden venomous spines along its dorsal fin.
The sharp fish.
When Shyam enthusiastically grabs the fish barehanded to pull it aboard, the spines slice deep into his palm. He drops the fish, bleeding heavily all over the pristine fiberglass deck.
And the coach doesn't offer him a towel or sympathy, does he?
No, he just stares at the blood and delivers the lesson. Handling predators always costs blood. You cannot manage a toxic high performer with charisma, team-building exercises, or soft conversations. You cannot hope they will magically develop empathy just because they are hitting their quarterly KPIs. The nature of a predator is simply to consume.
The coach tells Shyam he has exactly two mechanical choices. He can either throw the predator back into the sea and lose the catch entirely, or he can put on thick, impenetrable Kevlar gloves.
The gloves represent rigid, documented boundaries, clear behavioral standards, absolute HR authority, and documented consequences that are strictly enforced regardless of a person's sales numbers.
A leader must protect the ecosystem from the predator, even if the predator is actively feeding the ecosystem.
So Shyam returns to the office, puts on the gloves, and calls an executive meeting. He confronts Adrian, but he doesn't make it a debate about feelings or emotional intelligence.
But that would just give Adrian fuel.
Right. He makes it a debate about systemic risk. He tells Adrian that fear is a toxin that causes engineers to hide their mistakes, and an AI infrastructure company cannot afford hidden mistakes.
And when Adrian arrogantly refuses to accept those operational boundaries, Shyam fires him on the spot.
It is a terrifying risk. They immediately lose Adrian's momentum and his massive pipeline of deals. But by amputating the toxic limb, they save the soul of the company.
However, the moment they clean up their internal culture, a massive external threat materializes on the horizon. Crisis number 8.
Aegis Grid.
This is the copycat with sovereign funding.
Aegis emerges seemingly overnight, backed by literal billions of dollars from a foreign sovereign wealth fund. And they don't just launch a competing AI platform, they launch a pixel-perfect clone of Vesper Systems.
It's shameless.
They steal the UI design, they rip off the pitch deck structure, they even mimic the specific color palettes of Vesper's branding.
And worse, they actively capitalize on Vesper's recent AI fabrication scandal, heavily marketing themselves as the clean, safe, untainted alternative.
The audacity is just staggering, but it is a highly effective strategy. Aegis isn't trying to compete on technological innovation. They are executing a brute force attack using infinite capital and narrative manipulation.
And Shyam is completely unmoored by the injustice of it. He wants to drag them into court for IP theft, launch a massive PR counteroffensive, and publicly shame them.
He wants to go to war over the surface of the company. But the coach meets him on a foggy lake and physically demonstrates why that is a massive waste of energy.
The imitation lure.
The coach pulls out two fishing lures that look absolutely identical to the naked eye. They have the same painted scales, the same reflective eyes, the same shape. But one is a cheap, hollow piece of plastic stamped out in a factory, and the other is a heavy, meticulously engineered lure with reinforced internal wiring.
The coach drops this heavy truth. Copycats copy appearance, not depth.
He explains that in the short term, the cheap imitation lure will absolutely catch some fish. It will fool the market initially. But the moment a massive, aggressive fish takes the bait, the moment the product is put under the crushing pressure of real-world enterprise demands, the hollow plastic will shatter, the hooks will pull out, and the fake will fail.
I try to think about it like someone plagiarizing your resume.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
They might get the interview based on the words they stole, but they'll completely fall apart when they actually have to do the job. Depth is the one thing you just cannot fake. It's like a movie set. Aegis Grid can spend $1 billion building a perfect replica of a New York City street corner. It looks incredible on camera, but the moment a real customer walks onto the set and tries to open a door, they realize there is no plumbing behind the drywall. It is entirely superficial.
That's a phenomenal mechanical analogy.
Okay.
You cannot buy the deep, complex plumbing of a company. You cannot buy the scar tissue of surviving a massive AI fabrication scandal. You cannot buy the battle-tested deployment pipelines. Depth is forged through survival, not funding.
The coach tells Shyam, do not defend the surface, build depth.
So Shyam makes a deeply counterintuitive move. He completely ignores Aegis Grid.
He refuses to sue them.
He refuses to even mention them in the press. Instead, he takes all that defensive energy and pours it into accelerating Vesper's proof layer.
What's the proof layer again?
It's a highly complex cryptographic audit trail system that allows clients to mathematically verify every single action the AI takes. He bets the entire company on the thesis that Aegis Grid will inevitably collapse when subjected to the crushing gravity of real enterprise complexity.
He bets on the plumbing, and he is right. But the arrival of a massive, heavily funded competitor triggers a feeding frenzy in the tech media.
Which leads to crisis number 9.
The coordinated hit piece.
A major, highly influential tech journalist publishes a sprawling, deeply researched expose on Shyam. But it isn't about the technology, it is a full-blown character assassination.
It relies on anonymous quotes from former employees, likely fueled by the toxic executive Adrian who just got fired.
Oh, almost certainly.
And it paints Shyam as an unstable, ideologically extreme danger to the industry. It heavily implies that the government contract makes Vesper a rogue surveillance weapon.
The real-world damage of narrative warfare is immediate and quantifiable. Recruiting pipelines instantly freeze because top engineers don't want to work for a villain.
Enterprise customers pause their contract renewals to wait for the fallout to settle.
Shyam feels like he's suffocating. His instinct is to strike back, to publish angry point-by-point refutations on social media, to attack the journalist's credibility.
But the coach takes him out to an open expanse of water and simply points upward.
The eagle overhead.
High above them, this massive eagle is slowly circling in the thermals, its eyes locked onto the lake. The coach explains a fundamental law of nature. The eagle is not evil. It is not malicious. It is simply executing its biological imperative. It sees a target, and it hunts.
The coach delivers a brilliant philosophical reframing. He tells Shyam, the media is not your enemy. Gravity is. Yes. Success in any high-stakes arena mathematically equates to visibility. And in the modern attention economy, visibility inevitably attracts predators. You cannot become a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure company and expect to remain hidden in the tall grass.
You don't survive an eagle attack by standing in an open field and punching the sky. You survive by building a roof.
You build narrative armor. You don't waste energy screaming at the journalist. You systematically assemble a coalition of your most respected enterprise clients and have them publicly vouch for your integrity.
You open source key parts of your compliance algorithms to prove you have nothing to hide.
You construct an undeniable architecture of proof. You let the eagle circle in the sky, expending its own energy, while you remain secure beneath the roof you built.
And building that roof actually pays off. Vesper survives the media hit piece. Aegis Grid's cheap plastic product begins to fail under enterprise loads, just as predicted. Vesper regains its momentum.
But surviving all of this brings them to the absolute climax of the business arc. They have survived the gauntlet, and now the market is ready to crown a winner.
Crisis number 10. 6 months to immortality.
The market landscape is undergoing rapid consolidation. The analysts project that within 6 months, the major Fortune 500 companies will permanently lock in their AI infrastructure vendors for the next decade.
The window for independence is violently closing.
Vesper's board of directors recognizes this inflection point and pushes to raise a staggering $2 billion to execute a blitz-scaling maneuver. They want to capture the entire market at any cost.
The coach takes Shyam to a specific stretch of river during what fly fishermen call a short-season hatch.
The atmospheric conditions are perfect, and millions of insects are hatching simultaneously on the surface of the water. The river is literally boiling with activity.
The fish are in an absolute state of biological feeding frenzy. They have abandoned all caution and will strike aggressively at absolutely any lure thrown into the water.
It is the natural equivalent of a zero-interest rate bull market.
Yes.
The coach explains that during a massive hatch, even the most incompetent amateur fisherman looks like an absolute genius because the fish are practically jumping into the boat.
But the true danger of the hatch season isn't starvation, it is greed.
If you frantically pull in every single fish you can hook, you will physically overload the structural capacity of your small boat and sink it. Or you'll catch so many fish that you cannot process them, and the entire catch will sit in the sun and rot.
The coach tells Shyam, during a frenzy, do not just catch fish, build the cannery. Now, I have to stop and unpack this mechanically because building the cannery is a great metaphor, but how does it actually function in a software company?
It's a huge shift in operations.
If customers are literally begging to give you millions of dollars, telling your investors that you are going to intentionally slow down revenue acquisition to build internal tooling sounds like corporate suicide. How does a leader actually justify slowing down when a $2 billion window is closing?
It sounds like suicide until you examine the actual physics of hypergrowth. Blitz scaling usually means throwing raw human bodies at a scaling problem.
Right, just hire more people.
You raise $2 billion, so you immediately hire 1,000 new salespeople and engineers in a single quarter. But if you haven't built the cannery, the automated internal systems, those 1,000 new employees will overwhelm your HR department.
They break your code base because there are no automated testing environments.
And your internal culture completely disintegrates into chaos. Growth is catching the fish. Scaling is having the mechanized assembly line to process, clean, and package those fish without the factory floor descending into anarchy.
Speed without preservation is just rot. If you onboard 50 new Fortune 500 clients in a month, but your server architecture collapses under the load and your customer success team is entirely untrained, you haven't captured the market. You have just publicly humiliated yourself at scale.
Precisely. So Shyam returns to the board and executes a masterful negotiation. He agrees to take the $2 billion war chest, but he flatly refuses to scale chaos.
He mandates that for the first 90 days of the capital injection, revenue growth is deprioritized.
He funnels hundreds of millions of dollars straight into building the cannery. He builds highly sophisticated automated deployment pipelines, rigorous machine-led training protocols for new hires, and massive server redundancies.
He builds the industrial factory required to safely absorb the impending hypergrowth.
And thank God he built that reinforced cannery, because the moment they flip the switch to scale, they are hit with the most terrifying crisis of all.
Crisis number 11, the ghost in the system.
Vesper's internal security team detects a microscopic anomaly. A tiny fraction of outbound data traffic is beaconing to an unrecognized IP address.
It isn't a loud, destructive ransomware attack.
No, it is a highly sophisticated, incredibly patient, silent intrusion. They trace it back to a deeply buried supply chain tamper in an open-source library they utilized.
It is the digital equivalent of a ghost?
And based on the sophistication, it is almost certainly a foreign intelligence agency attempting to use Vesper's newly acquired government contracts as a backdoor into classified national security systems.
The coach takes Shyam out on the water and silently hands him a very specific type of fishing lure, the hidden hook.
It looks normal, but it has a secondary completely hidden barb buried in the metal. The coach explains the horrific mechanics of this hook. If the fish swallows it, you cannot just yank it out.
If you pull the line, the hidden barb catches on the internal organs and violently rips the fish's insides apart, killing it instantly.
The coach delivers the ultimate lesson in security protocol. In cyber warfare, patience catches the attacker. But when you discover a hidden hook lodged near the heart, you cannot slowly extract it. You must cut the line.
Cutting the line means sacrificing your immediate momentum, your short-term survival, and your public reputation to preserve the long-term integrity of the organism.
So Shyam cuts the line. He doesn't try to quietly patch the vulnerability while keeping the servers running. He executes a protocol that would give any venture capitalist a heart attack.
He manually halts all autonomous deployments across the entire global network.
He intentionally induces a massive, company-wide outage, risking absolute market panic and furious phone calls from the Pentagon.
He essentially stops the heart of the company to isolate the infection.
He orders his elite engineering team to rebuild the core cryptographic architecture from scratch. They rotate every single digital key in the ecosystem.
And then he leverages that proof layer he built back during the copycat crisis. He uses it to publish a mathematically verifiable public postmortem proving exactly how the breach occurred, what data was exposed, and that the new system is categorically clean.
He turns a catastrophic national security breach into the ultimate undeniable demonstration of Vesper's trustworthiness.
He proves to the market that when Vesper Systems is compromised, they do not hide behind PR statements. They amputate the infected systems and rebuild in the light of day.
That level of radical integrity makes them practically invincible. They survive the ghost. Vesper achieves what the industry calls immortality.
The enterprise clients lock in their decade-long contracts. The market cap soars. The infrastructure is impenetrable. The company has won the war.
But we arrive at the final crisis. Crisis number 12.
The weakest link.
Shyam is sitting in a massive celebratory board meeting. The champagne is poured, the billion-dollar valuations are confirmed, and right in the middle of a sentence, Shyam's vision tunnels.
His chest tightens.
He excuses himself, walks out into the pristine hallway, and physically collapses. He suffers a massive, full-blown panic attack, hyperventilating on the floor.
The irony is brutal. Shyam spent years systematically building massive redundancy into every single server rack, every software pipeline, and every executive layer of the company.
But he built absolutely zero redundancy into himself.
He ran his own mind and body at 100% utilization for 3 consecutive years without a single buffer of downtime. By trying to be the structural pillar holding up the sky, he became the single point of failure that could bring the whole company down.
The coach receives the phone call from the hospital. A few days later, he takes Shyam out on the water one last time. But this trip is different.
The empty boat.
When Shyam steps onto the small wooden boat, he looks around and realizes there is absolutely no gear. No fishing rods, no tackle boxes, no bait. It is entirely empty.
Shyam is confused, conditioned to expect a task or a lesson in mechanics.
But the coach simply rows them out to the center of the lake and stops. He tells Shyam, a boat that is packed to the brim with heavy cargo will sink the moment the hull is breached. But an empty boat possesses absolute buoyancy. It can survive the storm, and more importantly, it can be repaired.
Emptiness is not a failure of productivity. It is the vital preparation required for endurance.
The coach delivers the final truth of the narrative. The founder cannot be the physical hull of the ship. If you are the hull taking the constant battering of the waves, you will eventually crack and drown everyone aboard. You must step up to the bridge. You are just the captain.
A true leader builds an autonomous system that fundamentally does not require their frantic daily intervention to survive.
Which speaks directly to you listening to this right now. In corporate culture, we all develop this toxic hero complex.
We convince ourselves that if we step away from our laptops for a weekend or take a 2-week vacation, our departments will collapse into ruin.
But the coach's empty boat forces a terrifying realization. If your team or your project completely falls apart the second you stop managing it, did you actually build a successful, resilient system? Or did you just create a fragile, hostage situation where everyone is dependent on your exhaustion?
That is the ultimate diagnostic test of leadership maturity. If your company requires your suffering to function, you haven't built a company, you've built a trap.
So Shyam returns to Vesper Systems and fundamentally rewires his own operating system. He formally and publicly delegates sweeping operational authority to his hardened executive team.
Priya, Rachel, Aaron, and Mira.
He stops micromanaging the engineering sprints. And most importantly, he establishes a permanent, mandated fishing schedule for himself.
He forces emptiness into his calendar to ensure he maintains the psychological buoyancy required to actually lead.
He finally understands that in order to make Vesper Systems truly immortal, he has to stop trying to physically die for it.
What a phenomenal architectural journey. We watched Vesper Systems transform from a paranoid, hyper-intense weapon blindly firing into the fog into a mature, deeply rooted, and immortal institution.
And we watched Shyam transform from a frantic, reactive founder grabbing toxic predators with his bare hands into a leader who deeply respects the silent, invisible power of the river.
The source material leaves us with a profound concept to echo. Speed without preservation is just rot.
Look at your own life, your current projects, and the teams you manage. Are you just frantically hooking fish, ripping them out of the water, and letting them rot in the bottom of your boat because you are addicted to the velocity of the catch? Or are you possessing the discipline to slow down, secure the perimeter, and actually build the cannery?
That is the structural question to mull over today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Examine the blueprints of the boat you are building right now. Ensure it has the buoyancy to survive the storms ahead. And remember, when you find yourself moving too fast in shallow water, sometimes the bravest, most productive thing you can do is tear up the deck, face the storm, and drop the anchor.